Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor at USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Hour number 1 is just me and you. Hour number 2, Bert's going to be joining me and you. So if you'd like to call, if you've got some comments about, the broadcast, the topics, what we say, what we don't say, what you'd like, what you don't like, I'd love to hear that. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. I've got a call screen in front of me, and I want to describe this just a little bit. When I say a call screen, I don't mean we screen the calls. We do have, Jason answers the phone and asks for your first name and asks where you're calling from. And he asks what the topic is. That's just kind of like a little heads up to me. Generally speaking, we do not screen the calls for content. However, if we're talking about a specific subject and I mention that we want to stay on track with that subject, and please don't call in about something not germane to that subject, Jason will mention that so that the caller will understand that it's my desire as the instructor, or as a instructor, or as an instructor to keep the class on track and not get sidewobbled. So that is why we have Jason answer the telephone. And then what happens is he has a screen which is an exact copy of the screen that I'm looking at, or I have an exact copy of the screen he's looking at. That's more like it. And it shows all the telephone lines, and it shows how many people have called, when they called. It shows me that he has answered them. It shows me the name of the person, like Tom in Texas, and he wants to talk about car problems, for example, and how long he's been on hold. And so I can see that. So that's the call screen that I have. And then I have a little button, and I can point my mouse to it, and I can click answer the phone. I can click put him on hold, or I can click air the call, or I can click drop the call. Now I think I've only dropped 2 calls in 10 years, maybe 3, and it had to do with someone saying that the coronavirus was fake, fraud, not real. And I won't allow that. Now, am I censoring that? Yeah, I am. And I'll tell you why. I said it was real in the very beginning, well over a year ago. And I said it's expensive, deadly, debilitating, and you can die from it. Well, I won't have someone on USA Prepares saying that that's not true. And as I mentioned, we've had 2 extended family members die. Friends die. Friends become infected with it. And it's been serious for many people. Now, there are a few who have gotten by with what they say. It was just like a bad cold. But I remember, or a bad case of the flu. But I remember many years ago, before we talked about the corona panic and the coronavirus and the Chi-Com virus, I remember people getting a bad case of the flu, and they thought they were going to die. It was terrible. So just saying, it's just like a bad case of the flu is like saying, I felt like I was going to die. So I won't allow that, what I would consider quite reckless commentary and possibly advice on USA Prepares that might get people killed. It is my responsibility as a broadcaster to make sure that we don't send you off in the wrong direction and get you killed. That's my responsibility. So I think even Jumpin' Joe, the plagiarist, who, I don't have a lot of respect for, he says, and I'm paraphrasing, that wearing a mask is, it's not a really big deal. It's a little thing to do that could help. So what's the problem? And frankly, I agree with him. I really do. Nobody wants to wear a mask. But you know what? There's some benefits to wearing a mask. It makes it harder for the facial recognition system to pick you out. It does. So, maybe the next time when I get my driver's permit issued by the state here in the corrupt state of Missouri, I may say, no, I have to wear my mask. I have to do that. Because the president does, and I have to do that too. I'm just following his lead. You don't want me to follow the president's advice? So I just may do that. So today, if you'd like to call 866-582-9933, I'd love to hear from you. And I've got a couple comments about things that I've noticed here at our farm and at the shop. And I'd like to talk about clutches. 2% of vehicles that are sold, new vehicles that are sold in the United States of America, come with a manual transmission. 2%. That means 98% come with an automatic transmission. And I understand why automakers are not selling cars with manual transmissions. Because people don't know how to drive them. Frankly, they don't. And mostly it's women. Now, I'm not picking on women, but it's just a fact. It's a fact that women, generally speaking, especially young women, do not know how to drive a manual transmission vehicle. Why? Because there aren't a lot of them out there. So where are they going to find one to hop in and learn how to drive it? Well, when I was first married, and we're talking like in the 70s, to Mrs. Finelli, and we dated for 7 years, and I made darn sure that she knew how to drive a manual transmission vehicle. So she knew how to drive a small tractor, if you will, very small tractor, with a manual transmission and a clutch. And she learned how to drive my vehicles. I had 1968 American Motors AMX 4-speed. She drove that. Later on, I had a Lotus Europa. She learned how to drive that. That had a 5-speed. She learned how to drive her vehicle. And she wanted, and I think it was a really fine-looking vehicle that Ford manufactured. And if you look at them, every once in a while you see one on the Rockford Files. A Pinto station wagon, 1974. It was probably one of the best-looking station wagons ever made, maybe right after the Volvo 740 Turbo Wagon, which was an Italian body design. So that was it was like that Volvo happened to look like a Lamborghini station wagon. It really did. It was really impressive. We had one of those. Actually, I had two of those. We had a Volvo 240 diesel, 4-speed with overdrive. So it was like 5 speeds. You had to drive that too. So the thing about clutches, I think, I was talking to one of our neighbors yesterday. I said, so does your wife know how to drive a manual transmission? And he said, yeah, she does. So she's in her 80s. So ladies who are older know how to drive, generally speaking, know how to drive a manual transmission car because that's all there were back up until the 60s. For the most part, there weren't many automatic transmissions. So you had to drive a stick shift or a gear shift on the column. Now, believe it or not, they had, instead of that gear shift for the automatic transmission on the column, they had a transmission gear shift selector on the column. That was common. Anyway, and I mentioned it. So if you had an emergency and you had to get, that few miles into town and there were no cars, she could hop on your international 80 horsepower tractor or 65 horsepower tractor and drive to town in the tractor. And I said, absolutely. And that's a really good point. So if you have a four-wheeler, you may have one with a manual transmission. If you have a motorcycle, it probably has a manual transmission and a clutch. Ours do. So I think it's kind of important to know how to do that for an emergency purposes. Well, I want to talk about adjusting a clutch. So on my 1968 AMX or on the Lotus Europa or any of the other older vehicles, 60s and 70s and earlier than that, there was a mechanical linkage. When you stepped on the clutch pedal, you pushed down on the pedal and it pushed a rod, and the rod pushed a bell crank, and the bell crank moved the clutch. And the clutch would wear, the clutch friction surface would wear. It's called a clutch disc. Sometimes it's called a clutch plate. And it would wear because it was a friction material, and each time you used the clutch, it would wear just a little bit more. And you could adjust it and make it last longer. And then the adjustment was a 5-minute job. So I could get on my back and crawl underneath the AMX. And with 2 wrenches, very small wrenches, like half-inch roughly, half-inch nut, on this threaded rod, I could increase or decrease the length of this rod by just turning this nut in the rod. And I could lock it down. So 2 wrenches, 5-minute job at the most. And I'm done. Well, that's not the case anymore. So I have this brand new Chevrolet pickup truck. It's 20 years old. And it has a 4.3 liter V6. It's got a little over 250,000 miles on it. Has a 5-speed manual transmission. It's 2-wheel drive. It has air conditioning. It has crank-up windows and rubber floor covering. So it doesn't even have carpeting. And it does have crank-up windows. And it has manual locks. So there's no, press the button and unlock it, press the button, lock it. It doesn't have that. So the nicest thing it has is air conditioning. And that's the most of the creature comforts that it has. And the clutch was driving me crazy. And we bought this thing, and the guy just recently had the clutch replaced. And you had to press all the way to the floor and farther to get enough clearance to shift gears. And it really didn't work very well. And then what happened is you'd step on the clutch and it would stop midway. And then you'd hear a bang, bang, and the hydraulic line that operated the clutch would come apart. Then you had no clutch. And this happened while I was driving this darn thing. So I'm on the highway, 2 lanes going each way, 65 miles an hour, and I'm entering this highway, 1st gear, 2nd gear, 3rd gear, 4th gear, bang. I'm stuck in 4th gear. No way to disengage the clutch because the clutch pedal went to the floor. It was like the clutch became disengaged from the pedal. That's exactly what happened. I want to tell you why. This idiotic design from General Motors is a hydraulic clutch system. So instead of having a very simple rod and a bell crank that's adjustable, they went through all the effort to make the entire system hydraulic. When we come back, I'll tell you what that means. And I'll tell you what the difference in cost is. It's unbelievable. So I stepped on the clutch, and it went bang, and then I had no clutch. The pedal went to the floor, so I could not disengage the engine from the transmission, which meant that the only way I could get this thing to completely stop would be to stall the engine. I could not disengage the engine from the transmission. The clutch became locked in place. So we got the car home, and we have a trailer, a car hauler here at the farm. And we picked it up, took it home, put it up on the lift. And what was happening is when you step on the clutch, there's a connection between, I need to describe how this works. So when you step on the clutch pedal, it pushes what looks just like a brake master cylinder, and it operates hydraulically, pushes hydraulic fluid through a line, and this line is in 2 pieces. And about halfway between the clutch master cylinder, which is on the firewall, and the bell housing where the clutch slave cylinder is, and the throwout bearing. There's a break in the line which has a coupling, and it's really great. You just push this together. It's sealed by an O-ring, and there's a little clip that holds it in place. And when I step on the clutch, the pressure would cause this coupling to come apart. So we wired it together, and it still didn't work right. So we took we bled the lines. That didn't work. We took the transmission out. In order to do that, you have to remove the starter. You have to remove the exhaust system, most of it. You have to, where it connects to the engine. You have to unbolt the transmission. And then to get to the clutch, you have to remove the transmission, the drive shaft. And then if you want to look at the clutch system, you have to remove the pressure plate, the clutch pressure plate. And then you can remove the clutch disc and look at it. And we did all that. And we looked at the throwout bearing and the hydraulic system, and it looked fine. Put it all back together, and it did the same thing. We did it 4 times. But one of the times we bought all new parts. Bought a brand new clutch, brand new pressure plate, throwout bearing, and the line that comes from the throwout bearing, the hydraulic line that joins in that coupling. We bought a new master cylinder for the clutch. There's one little line we didn't replace. It's a little plastic line. It's about, 12 inches long. It has a coupling on the end, and we didn't replace that. We had the same problem. So we called the company, the tech support company, and they said, boy, you did everything right. Should work fine. And they said, there's a check valve in that little tiny hose, the one that we didn't replace. And when the guy said that, I said, that's it. That's the problem. Check valve. So we bought a new hose for that, or a new line. It was $62 or $61. Put that in, bled the system, and it worked fine. What I'm saying is, a clutch that used to be really simple to work on is now impossible to work on. And, it's roughly $400 worth of parts to get all of these lines and bearings and the clutch master cylinder and the clutch slave cylinder and the clutch throwout bearing and the clutch disc and the clutch pressure plate. And then, but to adjust the clutch, instead of the old system where you just take 2 wrenches in 5 minutes, just, crawl into the vehicle and adjust this rod and lock it down with a jam nut, takes 5 minutes. Now you have to take the starter out, the drive shaft out, the cross member that holds the transmission up. You have to disconnect the stick shift from the transmission. You have to lower the transmission after you unbolt it. And then to adjust it, you have to take the clutch pressure plate off. You have to take the clutch disc out. You have to take the flywheel off. And then you can put a shim, and they come in 2 different thicknesses. And I decided to buy a 50 thousandths of an inch thick. Now, what is 50 thousandths of an inch thick? Those 70 sheet one subject notebooks. The cover, that cardboard and plasticized cover. Real thin cover. That's about 50 thousandths of an inch. If you have, Lipton soup, the thickness of that Lipton soup box, that's about 50 thousandths of an inch thick. So I bought a shim, and I moved the flywheel out 51 thousandths of an inch. And that's how you adjust it. It's like an $800 job to adjust the clutch now. So, class, I'm talking about this transmission clutch adjustment. And I said it's about $800. What I'm talking about is this shim, this 50 thousandths of an inch thick shim, that goes behind the flywheel. So instead of just having a rod with that you turn with a wrench and a jam nut, and it's a 5-minute job, it is $800 worth of labor to put this $20 shim in. And first of all, you have to know about the shim to begin with. And if you want to know how big this shim is, if you get one of those tiny, they don't even have these kind of lids on. Okay, if you have a vitamin, a bottle of vitamins or a jar of vitamins, the size of the cap of a vitamin jar or bottle. That's about, it's a little smaller than this shim. But the shim is the thickness of maybe 7 sheets of paper. And it costs $20. But to put it in, you have to take the starter off. You have to put the vehicle in the air. You have, and this is a Chevy pickup truck, 2001, with just 2-wheel drive. So it's even simpler because it's 2-wheel drive rather than 4-wheel drive. And you don't have to take the transfer case down if you don't have 4-wheel drive. So you take the starter out, you take the transmission out, the drive shaft, the transmission cross-member support, the transmission, you disconnect the clutch, hydraulic line, and then you disconnect. After you remove the transmission, you remove the clutch pressure plate, the clutch disc, you remove the flywheel, and then you put the shim behind the flywheel and you put it all back together. So roughly $800 worth of labor to adjust the clutch, which used to take 5 minutes. And plus it's so complicated that it's nearly impossible for the homeowner to, well, it is impossible unless you have a lift to do this kind of a job. So I wanted to share that with you. And then I wanted to share with you the cost of vehicle repairs. There's a transmission shop within 50 miles of here, and they're the best shop around. And they recommended to one of their customers that he come see us. He had a problem with his Volkswagen Jetta. And so he showed up with his Volkswagen Jetta, and it's a 2004. And it's in immaculate, physical condition. Except for the fact that the guys that put it on the lift previously bent the underneath of the vehicle because they didn't know how to pick it up. This particular vehicle does not have a frame. It's called pinch weld construction. So they take various pieces of skin of the body and the underpan, and they pinch it together, and then they weld it with an electric welder. And you have to have a special adapter, actually 4 special adapters, to put on the lift in order to pick this thing up without damaging it. And I guess they didn't have those parts, but we do. And so we put it up in the air, and we looked at it and we thought, gosh, this has been put up in the air so many times. These guys don't know what they're doing. Anyway, so they bent the under part of this Volkswagen Jetta station wagon. And it's a shame because other than that, it looks really nice. The problem that this vehicle came in with was it would only go forward. I want you to think about that. This vehicle could not go in reverse. So if they wanted to pull into a parking space, like let's say at the Chinese factory outlet, pull into a parking space, and if someone pulls in front of you, then they'd have to back up, and they can't. So they'd have to get out and push the vehicle out of the parking space, which is really inconvenient if the engine's stalled and you're in traffic and you have to go backwards. Like, what do you do? So anyway, that was the problem. So we put this thing up on the lift, and we put our code readers on it, and we have a real sophisticated code reader. And it said that the transmission overheated. And the engine overheated. And the engine overheated because there is a really cheesy connection on the radiator hose to one of these little plastic adapter fittings that Volkswagen uses. BMW uses the same ones. They're real cheesy. And they fail all the time. So this really sophisticated high-tech diesel engine overheated. And the transmission overheated. And what happened in the transmission is it caused one of the pistons in the transmission to fail. Now, I'm not talking about an engine piston. This is a piston. It's similar, but it's in the transmission. Now, in order to get this piston repaired in the transmission, you have to take the wheels off. You have to take the axles off because it's front wheel drive. And you have to disconnect parts of the air conditioning system, the charging system, like the alternator. You have to take the battery out, disconnect the cooling system, and take the engine and transmission out. It's over a $2,000 job to just tear into the transmission, to go poking around to see exactly where this piston failed. $2,000. Now, what does this vehicle cost? Well, I looked it up. If it's in rough condition, the trade-in value is $425 for the entire 2004 Volkswagen Jetta. station wagon. If it's in average condition, the trade-in value is $925. If it's clean, which this one is, the trade-in value is $1,350. The clean retail price that a dealer would sell it for is $2,750, $2,750. So we have a vehicle that it will take $2,000 to just figure out what's wrong with the transmission. And the vehicle's worth, at the most, $2,750. But it has 200,000 miles on it, so it's probably worth a little bit less than that. What I'm telling you is the cost of these vehicles today to repair them is out of control. Absolutely out of control. Okay. So, let's see. I got another page here. So what does it cost to operate a Volkswagen 2004 Jetta? Okay. Well, let's see. By the way, it's plagued with all kinds of problems, this particular vehicle. This model vehicle, not necessarily one we have here, but okay. So if you have a Volkswagen Jetta 2004 and you need to have your air conditioning receiver dryer replaced, that is like a filter in the air conditioning system. It costs between $337 and $400 to have that air conditioning receiver dryer assembly replaced. That's not the compressor. That's without the compressor. That's without the expansion valve. That is just the receiver dryer assembly. That's like the least expensive component in the air conditioning system. If you want to replace the compressor, add like another $400 or $500 to that. If you have a fuel injector problem, fuel injector replacement on this particular car, there's only 4 of them because it's 4-cylinder. It's between $459 and $524, according to RepairPal.com. You can look this up yourself. Now, if you have a huge problem like an oil pump in the engine, you know, that little pump that pumps the oil around and keeps it lubricated, that's between $1,600 and $1,900. I'm rounding. Between $1,600 and $1,900 to replace an oil pump. Now, if I had to replace the oil pump on my 1968 AMX, it's in the front of the engine. I can get to it within like an hour, and I can replace it within 2 hours. So I can get it apart and put back together in 2 hours. And I know what the part used to cost. It was like $29 back in the 70s. If you have a clutch assembly adjustment, you know, and this obviously has the kind that I was talking about with mechanical adjustment, you know, that takes 5 minutes. That's between $40 and $51 on this Volkswagen Jetta. If you want to have your oxygen sensors tested, it's between $40 and $51. Let me tell you how you do that. You plug in a connector on a short cable to one of these scan tools. And you turn the key onto, this kind of thing, you turn the key onto just the run position, and it will tell you if it failed already. It takes 5 minutes. So that costs and there's no wrenches, no getting greasy. And the connector is right, probably where your right knee is, or your left knee is, right under the dash. And you can just reach under there and feel it. And you just plug this cable in there, and you turn your scan tool on, and it'll tell you. Now, if you have a knock sensor on the engine, it tells if the engine is having pre-ignition, that replacement is $270 to $306. If you have a throttle position sensor replacement, that's $372 to $393. If you have a sunroof and the switch that controls the sunroof, you know, open, close, the switch, $222 for a switch. If you have a automatic transmission brake shift interlock solenoid that needs to be replaced, that's $533 to $557. This is for a 2004 Volkswagen Jetta. So the cost of an oil pump replacement is probably about the average price or the average selling price of what one of these Volkswagen Jettas would sell for used. It's unbelievable. Okay, so I was thinking about a starter for the Chevrolet Silverado that I have. It's a 2001. And according to Repair Pal, the starter replacement cost is between $450 and $484. Seems like a lot of money to me. Because I know what a starter costs. It costs $100. You can go to AutoZone right now and buy a starter for a Chevrolet Silverado 1500 4.3 liter V6, whether it has an automatic or manual transmission. It's going to be $100. Plus or minus 10. $100. And to get somebody to put that in for you, the total job for the starter that would cost them $100, they would charge you between $450 and $484. Now, how long does it take? Well, we're pretty slow. It takes us a long time because we look at lots of things. We look at the bolts and we make sure, and there are 2 bolts that hold this on and 2 electrical connections and 2 bolts. And the bolts are real easy to get to. Real easy to get to. No special tools, just standard sockets and a ratchet. It takes us about 15 minutes to do a replacement. That's us. Now, someone who's a lot smarter might be able to do it in 5 minutes. But we look at everything. We look at the teeth on the starter. We look at the ring gear on the flywheel. We want to make sure that, the new starter that goes in is not going to get damaged by the teeth on the ring gear of the flywheel. What I'm saying is, cars are really, really expensive to have fixed. And it's crazy. These numbers are crazy. So, I'll tell you a little bit more. We'll talk about John Deere. I'll tell you what John Deere said to our son when he was at the university in 2016. Before I mention John Deere, I just wanted to tell you that yesterday I heard a commercial on USA Prepares. And I wasn't entirely pleased with the verbiage that was used in this particular commercial. And I sent an email to the CEO, and I'm going to read it to you. I used his first name, this quote, his first name. Then I said, I hear your commercials on GCN about your, and we'll call it product. Specifically on our broadcast class, USA Prepares. Do you think the words, and I used 2 words that he used in his commercial, do you think the words blank and blank that you use in your commercials enhance your radio image? Thank you, Vincent. Okay. And I got a response back, and I was copied on this. And this went to senior management at Genesis Communications Network. It says, hi, and the person's name. Please, can you take this commercial out of rotation? Thank you. And it was signed by this person and the company name. Now, out of rotation means in advertising, let's say you have 5 different commercials, and they just tell the computer, okay, play these in random order. And so the commercials rotate from one to the next, so you don't hear the same commercial over and over and over again. So they're taking this one out. That happened within, let's say, 30 minutes of my email to them. And I applaud them for doing that. I really do. And then what happened? Well, 2 things. One thing didn't happen, and one thing did happen. The thing that didn't happen is I didn't get thrown off the air. Now, usually if you say something about any advertisers, you get thrown off the air. And I have a degree in that. I've been thrown off the air because of some things that I've said about advertisers, which I have an agreement that whenever I go on the air with a company, the agreement is always the same, that if I don't like the commercials, they will not air on USA Prepares, period. Because I think that the commercials are a reflection of USA Prepares, and people link us with them and them with us. So I want to make sure that we have a good relationship and the products and services that are being offered are of value and that I approve of. And am I a dictator in this? Absolutely. Absolutely. So what could happen is I could get thrown off the air. I could be absolutely right, and I could say, no, I didn't like it, and I could be removed from the air. And that's a risk that I take. But what happened was, number one, I haven't been removed from the air yet. We might find out on Monday, but I don't think so. I think we're going to stay on the air. And number two, I've gotten praise from people who have emailed me, who figured out how to contact me. It's Instructor at USA Prepares. And they said, good job. Great. Thank you for raising the bar. So I wanted to share that. Next thing, John Deere. When our son was studying agriculture at the university, he happened to be in a class in 2016. And so our son's major was agriculture, farming. He went to the university to learn how to be a farmer. And he is. Right here. At our farm. Our family farm. And he said, Dad, you're not going to believe this. We had this guy come in as a guest lecturer, and he was from John Deere. Had the John Deere shirt on, John Deere uniform. And he said, John Deere is transitioning from being a company that manufactures iron, like plows, implements, tractors, metal, to an information technology company. He said this guy was talking about they want to have a heads-up display. So the windshield of a John Deere tractor in the future will be an information display. So you can look through it. You can see where you're going, but there'll be oil pressure, the idiot lights will be on there, the speed, navigation, how the implements are connected, the sensors on the implements, all that will be on the windshield. And you'll be able to look through. It's kind of like having an instrument cluster for your vehicle, but on the windshield. So as you look forward, you can see, what's happening. And he said that John Deere said that, this representative from John Deere said that, so your equipment will be connected to the cell tower. And as you use the equipment, if you have a failure, it will place a call to John Deere. John Deere will dispatch a technician with the part or parts to come to your location, because they know where you are, right? A satellite will tell them exactly where you are. Global position sensing, global positioning will tell them exactly where you are. And they'll come and fix your equipment, and they will be dispatched within a half an hour. They'll have the parts, the technician, the tools, and they're going to come and fix it right in the field. What they failed to say is what that's going to cost. And they failed to say that you can't fix it yourself, because you won't have the computer connections, you won't have the computer tools, and you won't have the parts. So you will be 100% dependent on a company that uses green and yellow paint. John Deere. Unbelievable, right? Well, to me, I'm not interested in that at all. That's why some farmers are buying older tractors. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Bert's with us. Welcome, Bert.
Hey, Vince. How's the climate out in your neck of the woods today?
Well, I got to tell you, Bert, it's really sunny. We had several inches of rain over the last couple of days. The grass is growing beautifully, and it's the exact opposite of what I'm reading in the Southwest, where it looks like we got all their rain, and they are in a drought that's the worst in 19 years. So the reservoirs are down, the lakes are down, and it's a real serious problem out there. Is that true? I mean, are you hearing that too?
Well, those things happen. There's always some part of the country, or for that matter, the world, that experience extreme climate. That's pretty much been going on as long as we've had civilization, and probably way before. I'm sure the dinosaurs complained about, poor crops and bad eating and too hot days at some period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure they did. You know, and there's one other thing that I've noticed, and that is our solar panels are generating more electricity. And in periods when it's overcast, they're generating more than they used to over the last 5 years when it was overcast. And they're certainly generating more when it's sunny. So much more that my plan for over the weekend is to install another charge controller on the same number of solar panels, because the solar panels are delivering more electricity than the charge controllers can handle. So we have 2 charge controllers. I have to add a third one, and I have to actually literally electrically split one of our solar arrays, which has 27 panels in it. I have to split that in half. So half of it will go to one charge controller and another will go to another charge controller. And these charge controllers are 60 amps each. So they're not tiny. They're certainly substantial, and they can't handle the extra electricity that is currently being generated by the solar panels. I believe that that it's coming from one main source. Now, I can't prove any of this. It's just my feeling that the fewer airplanes flying in the sky, delivering less overhead air pollution from burning jet fuel. And if you ever watch one of these things take off, it's black. Black soot comes out the back end of these jet engines. That's one thing. And the other thing is the chemical spraying of the airplanes that would crisscross during the Obama administration and into the Donald Trump administration, the crisscrossing of the skies with these chemtrails. And we have photographs. I mean, there's as many as 30 at a time that we can see crisscrossing across our farm, just looking up. So the lack of that, because they're not spraying chemicals here anywhere near as much as they used to. We might see 1 or 2 every few days, but nothing like 30 and 40 a day. So I think that the occlusion of the solar rays by the chemicals that have been sprayed in the air pollution, the absence of some of that is allowing our solar panels to operate more the way they were designed to, and we're generating more electricity. So I have to increase the ability to harness that energy. So I just wanted to share that with you. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, I say look at the data, and I'm looking at a couple of graphs as we speak right now, and they're sort of interesting. And one of them is solar irradiance. So the actual emissions, total light and everything else, emission from the sun over a period from 1880 to 2020. And it's more or less constant, but it actually increased a bit from, let's say around 1920 to 1960. Then from about 1960 to 70 had a big fall, went up again in 1980, and since 1980, it's been on a steady decline, and it's actually at its lowest point right now since the graph began, this particular set of data, in 1880, maybe 82 or so. So actual power from the sun doesn't support your theory on the solar cells. Now, that doesn't, this data has nothing to do with what may be in the air, having less pollution in it. That may be what you're seeing with the effect with more output from your solar panels. But in terms of actual radiance from the sun, there's nothing to support it. In fact, as I said, we've had it's not big. I mean, the variance here, we're talking a few percent, so it's fairly minor. So I think you could probably say it's been more or less constant. So, but this does not take into account any attenuation through the air and the atmosphere and pollution, as you mentioned. So you could be right. I just don't have the data to say one way or the other. But the other interesting graph that I'm looking superimposed on this graph is the yearly average temperature. And again, from about 1880 to 2020. And what we see is more or less constant through until about 1960. There's a little dip at 1900, then there's a steady increase through the 20s, and from 1960 onward, the whole trajectory of the curve goes steeply upward. And what we see is about a 1 degree centigrade increase in temperature over the planet, and almost all of that occurring from 1960 to present. And we've discussed this before, but I think it's pretty hard to argue that man has not caused that, especially because we can more or less take the sun out of the equation, and the real conclusion has to be, yeah, something man did has affected this. Now, there's been other increases in temperature. Most notably, over thousands of years, we've had an increase in temperature, and that may indeed have to do with the sun. It may have to do with volcanic activities, may have to do with, what amount of temperature escapes from the core of the earth, and other factors. Probably nothing to do with man. But this effect over the last 100 plus years of 1 degree, I think we can say is because of man. Now, what do we do with it is a different question. What do we do about it? I think we're on a trajectory to, it may go up a little bit more for a few more years, but I think we're getting pollution under control, which affects some of this. And I believe, I'm optimistic that we're going to stop burning coal at some point and move to more sustainable energy sources, such as you mentioned, your solar panels. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think, according to some politicians, we have 7.5 years left when they said we had 10 years till the end of the world. So I guess that's down to 7.5 now. So we'll see about that.
I've got a comment. So about 16 years ago, we started building our farmhouse here on the farm, on the land here in Missouri. And I decided, instead of hiring a moving van to move all of our possessions from Virginia, my parents' possessions, and ours, because we lived right next to each other on a family compound, if you will. Instead of hiring a moving van and making one big move, I decided to buy a trailer. And this trailer was 20 feet long, 8 feet high, 8 feet wide. It's actually a race car trailer. I bought it used, and I thought, this is perfect. It's a box trailer. I can pull it behind our Dodge Cummins turbo diesel truck, 3/4 ton truck. And since I'm going to be going back and forth anyway, while it was going to take 18 months or 2 years to build a house, since my son and I were going to be going back and forth to Virginia, we might as well just pull his trailer with us and start moving our possessions, furniture, etc., books, carpets, equipment, in this van. And so we'd go through the same route all the time. And we'd take the interstate, and one of the cities that we would go through was Louisville, Kentucky. And so we went through in all 4 seasons. And what I noticed, in this particular 1999 Dodge pickup truck has a outside temperature sensor, and it has a display, an overhead display that tells you the outside temperature. So you can tell if you're driving in weather that where rain could turn to ice. You'd know that if you paid attention to the temperature. Well, what I noticed was the city of Louisville, as we approached it, was warmer than the outskirts, leading up to it and after we passed it. And it was warmer in the summer. It was warmer in the spring. It was warmer in the winter and fall. And in the winter, it was 10 degrees warmer. Now, how is it possible that the city of Louisville, Kentucky, can be 10 degrees warmer than 30 miles before it or 30 miles after it? How is that possible? Well, my belief is that all the black roofs of the city buildings, the row houses, all the buildings, plus all the gasoline that's burned in the vehicles, plus all the diesel fuel, plus all the home heating oil, plus all the natural gas, plus all the energy consumed by those living in Louisville, Kentucky, and the black roofs, and the lack of the green trees that were displaced, and the grass displaced by all these buildings and roads, and black roads, absorbed more heat from the sun, and produced more heat through the burning of fuels and electricity and energy. And I believe that's true. So what I'm saying is, you look at any city, and I'll bet it's the same thing. More heat in the cities than outside the cities. How's that ring with your thoughts, Bert?
It's absolutely true. There's no question about it, and it's caused, by many factors. Both the fact that there's so many black roads and the rooftops and everything else, plus all the heat that's being generated inside the cities. So, that, and not to mention, there's other effects too. It's besides heat, that in Arizona the humidity's gone up. In Phoenix, like doubled, and you know why the humidity in Phoenix has doubled? It has nothing to do with climate.
Yeah, it's all these people from New Jersey that moved to Arizona, because of their respiratory conditions, and they think they missed the green lawn that they had in New Jersey.
And
so they put in a lawn.
And the pool.
Yeah. Yep. Because they missed the pools and the lawns.
Yep.
And those mint juleps out by the pools. We'll be right back. Bert's with us, and we're talking about the climate. And I think we're proving to you that man has altered the climate. And not necessarily in a positive way. I think overall in a negative way. So, Bert, I have two comments. I'll do one at a time. One, you mentioned Arizona and the humidity increasing dramatically. I'm paraphrasing. I submit to you that, and to the class, that about 100% of the water that is used to water those lawns that have been put in Arizona by people who moved there from New Jersey. Now, I'm just using that as a case. I'm sure there are people from New York and Connecticut and Rhode Island that have moved to Arizona as well. But those people who have decided that, they don't want to have just dust and gravel in their front yard. They want to have a green lawn like they're used to back on the East Coast. So when they water their lawns, I submit to you, class, and Bert, that about 100% of that water that they sprinkle on the lawn to keep it green evaporates into the air and causes humidity. 100%. Your thoughts?
Well, of course, 100%. And it is recycled back. I mean, all the water on the planet is still the water on the planet, either in the oceans or in the ice caps or in moisture in the air. So, of course, it's recycled back. Is it harmful? Well, hard to say if it's harmful, but it is certainly changing the climate in Phoenix. And probably Las Vegas.
And if you had a cup of coffee this morning, let's be a little bit graphic, semi-graphic. If you had a cup of coffee, just as I have a cup of water here, it's reused dinosaur pee, at least some percentage of it. Okay? It is. Because we only have the water that was on the planet. We're not getting any more. That's it. There is no more water. So we are reusing water. So the guys that water their lawns in Arizona, that water is taken in by the grass plants and the other vegetation. It's consumed and it is released by the plants into the air, which is why you have to keep watering the lawn. Okay, that's why. And the swimming pool was the other thing I wanted to mention. In Jericho, the television series Jericho, they mentioned, I was a pool guy, in a past life, and so was Vincent Finelli. I maintained a couple pools. And one of the things that happens when you have a pool, a swimming pool, is there's a water faucet nearby with a hose. And the reason is because you have to keep topping off the height of the pool. Otherwise, the skimmers that collect the bugs and debris that lands on the surface of the pool, the skimmers won't work properly. So the swimming pool has to be a certain height. In addition, some pools are at a state where the water pressing outward on the walls is met by the earth pressure pressing inward. And if you take the water out of some pools, the pools will collapse. Actually, the earth will win and push the pool sides in. So you have to keep water in the pool in most cases with pools. So, but where does that water go? You put an inch in like once a week. You have to top it up. Well, it goes into the air. That's where it goes, unless you have a leak in the bottom of the pool or the sides of the pool. But that's it. So when you talk about Arizona, the evaporation of all those pools and all those lawns, that's why. That's why the humidity is increased. Back to you.
No doubt about it. That's probably the most easy explanation of man directly causing climate change right there. No doubt about it. But I put everything in balance. And I think in 7 years, I think we're going to be fine. But in the next segment, what I want to talk about is something that may happen in the next 7 years. In fact, there's now scientists saying it may happen in 3 years. It has nothing to do with man, and it actually could be way more cataclysmic than anything we've talked about in terms of the 1 degree warming or the extra moisture in the air in Phoenix.
Yeah, in class, we're going to be clear on this 1 degree warming. You may think that's nothing, but it's 1 degree centigrade or 1 degree Celsius, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're used to thinking in Fahrenheit numbers. So if you think about it, 70 degrees outside feels really good. 110 degrees outside feels really hot. So there's a narrow band that humans are comfortable with. Bert's with us, and we're talking about climates. And Bert, you mentioned something that could happen. Scientists are talking about in the next 3 to 7 years that's really significant, really alarming. Would you please tell us more about that?
Sure, Vince. Actually, next 3 to 4 years. So as much as I may downplay the effects of climate change on civilization and our planet, there's another effect that I believe really should be brought more to the forefront because we know it happens and we know it's going to happen again. And that's solar storms, in particular coronal mass injection. And what that is a periodic eruption of the sun that sends energy out from the sun. It's not at the speed of light, it's a little slower, so it takes 1 or 2 days to arrive and causes havoc on the planet. And they've occurred, I want to say semi-regularly, we can almost predict them. And each one has done more and more damage to the planet because we have more and more dependence on electrical systems, the electrical grid, electronics, and so forth. And right now we are entering a solar cycle, and there's an 11-year solar cycle of the sun, and these storms tend to peak when the solar cycle peaks. So the current cycle we're in right now started in December of 2019, so we're about a year and a half into it. It's expected to peak in about 3 or 4 years when we could expect the most chance of another coronal mass ejection. And many scientists, there's nothing to do with politics, this is just pure science, say that this storm may be one of the worst on history. And they're saying that simply for what they've already seen in terms of solar storms, solar flares, and those sort of things. And like I said, we have about 3 years to prepare for it, and I don't think we're doing enough, in particular, to protect the power grid. And, you know, it's not a joke. It's happened. The most recent one happened in Quebec. I think you probably heard of that one, Vince, when it knocked out the power system in Quebec for a few days.
Yeah, I remember that. And we've talked about that. And Bert, I have a suggestion for the class. Class, if you want to prepare for a grid down situation, if you want to prepare for just a partial grid down situation, if you want to prepare for a local power outage, if you want to prepare for your street not having electricity because some drunk driver crashes into a power pole and breaks it, and you're without electricity until they get another power pole in its place and, up and connected and so forth. If you want to know what that's like, here's what you do. Today is Friday. So tonight, you can tell your family, you can say, look, we know there's going to be a power outage starting at 6 o'clock tonight. We know that. We know that because I'm going to go to the circuit panel and I'm going to shut off all the breakers that are not medically necessary. So if you have someone on an oxygen concentrator or something like that, medical equipment, you don't want to shut that breaker off. But you can shut off and leave your refrigerator and freezer running so you don't lose food. But put some tape over the refrigerator door and the freezer door to remind you that the power has failed and you can't go in there and get anything because there's no electricity to cool the refrigeration equipment that you have in your house. And you put a piece of tape over the toilet flush handle because there's no water either. Okay? So you do that and you tell the family at 6 o'clock the power's going to fail. And you simulate a power failure by turning off all the breakers. Now you know in advance that the power is going to go off at 6 o'clock. So you can get ready. You can do everything that you want. And I've offered this homework. No one in 10 years has done it. No one. But I'll tell you what, if you do it, you'll be way more prepared for what it's going to be like. And then what you do is you sit around the kitchen table and you say, well, flashlight batteries are dead. Phone has a little flashlight in the back, we can use that until the battery goes dead. But then if we do that, we won't have the phone. And then you figure that at the same time, there's no cell service because the grid's down. So within a couple hours, cell service goes down. The landlines go down. The water treatment plant goes down. Everything stops. And then you write down what that's like. And you write down all the things that you don't like. Like, shoot, boy, it would be great to have something out of one of those cans of food, but we have an electric can opener, and that doesn't work without the grid. So then you write down, manual can opener, matches, candles, flashlight batteries, maybe some emergency lighting, maybe a alternative power source, maybe an inverter that you can hook up to your car. Because on average, your car has half a tank of fuel. And if you have an inverter, let's say 1,000 watts or 1,200 watts, you might be able to run your refrigerator. And you start your car engine, every 20 minutes. You've got a half a tank of fuel in the car. So you just charge the battery and then shut it off. And then charge the battery and shut it off. And you do that only for the absolute necessities. But in the wintertime, you figure, well, it's freezing outside anyway, so we don't need a refrigerator, right? What I'm saying is, if you want to know what it's going to be like, what Bert's talking about, all you have to do is simulate it. And you can do that tonight. And if you can't stand it, you go to the circuit panel and you turn the breakers back on. And you go, boy, that was terrible. Bert, back to you.
Yeah, well, that's all good preparation, Vince. And just to kind of put a little bit of reality into this, we just had, so again, I mentioned we're at a solar minimum. We're climbing out of it, but the sun has already begun heating up. Last Monday, we had a huge solar eruption. And I don't know if people, if there's any ham radio operators out there, you probably know about this. The first thing that happened were X-rays and ultraviolet rays bombing the Earth, and all shortwave over the Pacific Ocean went dead. We're talking about Monday a week ago. Then typically the coronal mass injection, again, which is a little different phenomena, takes a day or two, and we were waiting for that to hit Tuesday or Wednesday. It didn't seem to be that bad. But the pulse of X-rays and ultraviolet rays was hugely intense. And radio conditions, there was no shortwave over the Pacific Ocean because that was the surface of the Earth that was facing the sun when it happened. So things are already heating up. And taking care of your power system at your home is probably the most important thing you can prepare. And by the way, that makes good sense no matter what. Even if we escape any serious solar storms this cycle, it makes total sense to protect your home power system. And of course, we have to do that for the communities, the power grid, the whole country. But and what happened in Quebec should be a lesson. Quebec's actually learning, and they beefed up their system. And by the way, Vince, do you know why in particular Quebec was hit so badly in that storm?
Please share that with the class.
Well, it actually, believe it or not, has to do with the soil that was underneath Quebec when the coronal mass ejection came hurling toward the earth, and that the Quebec is basically on soil that's an insulator. So think of this much like lightning looking for a path of least resistance into the ground to discharge itself. So just by chance, this eruption hit the Quebec area of Canada, and because the soil was such a good insulator, it goes, okay, what's around here that we can discharge into? And not that electrons think, but they do. And they basically went into the power grid. That was literally the path of least resistance to discharge into the ground, was to go all through the power grid, zap out all the transformers, everything, fry everything, and just discharge into the ground. And that was the primary reason why Quebec was actually hurt so bad during that storm in 1989.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that explains, Bert, why people who live in the country, like we do here at the farm, where the buildings, houses are few and far between, like our nearest neighbor is our closest neighbor is a mile away. And so when lightning hits, it doesn't have a lot of choices of places to go. Whereas in terms of electronic equipment damage, whereas if you compare that to a city where apartments and their high-rise buildings and so forth, there are lots of places to absorb those electrical pulses or those hits, right? Lots of places. So equipment is damaged less, in my opinion, in the city environment than it is in the countryside. Your thoughts?
Well, that's just law of averages. But by the way, Vince, there's one exception, storms, that had nothing to do with the sun. And I think the listeners will appreciate this. We had one exception where something almost exactly the same happened in 1962, July 1962. And sadly, this was just before we signed the nuclear test ban treaty with Russia. We set off a 1.5 megaton warhead over the Pacific Ocean, Johnson Atoll, and it created a huge electromagnetic pulse, and it burnt out. I mean, get this. This was, hundreds of miles away from Hawaii, but it burnt out street lamps in Hawaii, set off burglar alarms, screwed up the electrical system. And Hawaii was I believe it's almost 1,000 miles, many hundreds of miles away from the atomic blast. But we did that one, human beings, sadly. And you can imagine the devastation that would happen if we, God forbid, ever had a nuclear war. What would happen with these type of things?
So for certain, we would go back to pre-industrial times. If we could figure out how to do it, we could make steam engines again, and we could burn wood. It'd be terrible. We'd have what we have, and it'd be really hard to go forward. And the electronics would just pretty much be useless, in my opinion. So, Bert, what do you recommend that our students and instructors do here at USA Prepares to protect ourselves from what you believe and what scientists believe is going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years?
Well, it's always good to have a backup system for your power, battery backup. Now, we don't know if the power will be down for an hour, for a day, or for a week. There's not too many systems that can supply power for, at least battery-wise, for a week. but your generator can if you have, diesel fuel on board. Surge protectors can help. I mean, obviously, if the power goes out, surge protector isn't going to bring it back, but it can protect. Typically, when power goes down unexpectedly, like this would be, there's surges on your power line. So what we're saying is instead of a steady voltage of 220 volts coming into your home, there's going to be spikes on it. That could be, many times that amount of voltage. And those spikes, when they get into your electronic equipment or really any electrical equipment, can cause damage, especially to your refrigerator or things like that. So a surge protector helps, and you can buy one that you can put right into your electric.
Bert's with us. Bert, I just did a little bit of arithmetic during the break, and you mentioned generators. I have here at the farm a military surplus generator. It's probably between 30 and 40 years old. And it is rated for a lifespan of about 8,000 hours. 8,000 hours. So I did a quick calculation. If we take 8,000 hours life expectancy, assuming proper oil changes and oil filter changes, continuously running, that would be 333 days. That's less than 1 year. Then I looked up the life expectancy of a typical gasoline single-cylindered generator, the kind you might buy at a big box store. Life expectancy is around 1,000 hours. And if you ran that 24 hours a day, that would be 41 days. And of course, you'd have to change the oil every day because a lot of them don't have oil filters, and you change the oil every 25 hours. So roughly once a day if you ran it continuously. So there is probably a false sense of life expectancy of generators, and also an underestimation about how much fuel a generator burns. So this diesel generator that we have burns about a half a gallon of fuel per hour. A gasoline-powered generator that, would run your house, let's say 7,000 watts or so, or 5,000 watts, is going to burn about a gallon of gasoline an hour. So that means you need 24 gallons of gasoline a day if you ran it 24 hours a day. So that's not practical. So I just wanted to put that in the minds of our students today about generator economics and generator efficiency and generator power consumption. Back to you with the surge protectors, or if you have a comment about generators. Bert, are you there? Did I lose Bert? Huh. Well, let's see. I don't see any. Oh, okay. Okay, Bert, back to you. All right.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. I didn't do anything at my end. Maybe.
No, we know. Jason fixed the problem. It was at the network. Go ahead. Back to you.
Yeah. So I think what you mentioned is important, because what it points to is the best thing you can really do, and it is sustainable. And I don't mean sustainable from an eco standpoint, but sustainable in that you can keep it working, is solar panels. And even if it's not enough for everything in your home, I know, Vince, in your system, you segregate how your power is wired so you can devote the panels to the higher priority circuits if you wish. But solar panels, really, you can keep those going forever. I mean, if it's the summertime, you're going to have pretty good generation if you have a lot of cells on your roof. And that's really the best thing you can do. And of course, coupled with a battery backup. But if the grid goes down, the battery backup will still be able to, store energy during the day and give you some energy at night. So, I think solar makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes sense even in with no problems on the grid, but it certainly makes sense to protect your home from a power shutdown.
Yeah, and our solar system only has two moving parts. And the question may be thinking I'm kidding, because you think of a solar system with no moving parts, but ours has two that operate routinely and regularly. And one of them is a fan that cools the inverter. So it takes DC 48 volts and converts that to alternating current 220 and 240 and 120 volts. And there's a fan to cool off those electronics. So when those electronics are running, there's a sensor that says, okay, time to turn on the fan. And it does that automatically. And then there's another fan, and I put a computer fan, a heavy duty computer fan that blows on air onto the charge controllers. Now, the charge controllers that we have are made by Schneider Electric, and they don't have any fans. But I don't like that, because I think they get too warm. So I put a fan on them. It just blows air on them. Kind of think of it as just a fan sitting at a location where it just blows more air rather than whatever air is moving in the location where the charge controllers are. And I do that because I think that the extra power consumption of maybe 10 watts is a great investment in terms of reducing the electronic failure that would occur from additional heat being inside the charge controllers. So I'm removing that heat. So Bert is suggesting you consider solar power. I think he's absolutely right. That's why we have it. And right now, class, if you have a solar system and you have a grid tied system and the grid goes down, you've got nothing. Nothing. It will not generate electricity because it requires the grid to provide the clock for the 60 cycle current. And if the grid goes down, you don't have the clock and the system won't work. Bert, back to you very quickly.
Yeah, so good advice then, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, and Bert, thanks for joining the regular faculty meeting here on a regular basis. And Bert will be with us for 1 hour, second hour on Fridays. Bert, thank you so much for dedicating your time to our broadcast classroom. Class, above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.